Hello, everyone. Welcome to the No Zoo Lines podcast. This is episode 6. My name is Ari. I'm here with Chad. And today we're going to bring you a topic, which is how de-escalation is a multi-tiered approach. Now, often in law enforcement, you see the term de-escalation, and usually administrators or political pundits will say, hey, that means one person talking to another person and bringing them down, and we should all be able to de-escalate verbally. While that is part of the de-escalation process, Chad and I have some very opinioned views on there's other ways to de-escalate a situation. So welcome, Chad.
Hey, how are you, Ari?
I'm good. So you currently, everyone's probably wondering why you look like a miniature thumbnail right now. So you're currently in Louisiana, right?
That's correct. Yeah, I'm out in Baton Rouge,
Okay.
Louisiana, and I'm at the Louisiana State Police Academy and their main training center here in Baton Rouge, which is awesome.
Cool. You're running a C4C program now?
Yeah. So this is a custom. It's only for the agency. They wanted some very specific things, and it's for their instructor cadre, and it's a lot of fun. It's really good. What's interesting is everything they wanted is basically in our level one.
Yeah.
Anyway, they wanted a few emphasis for their guys, but as the class is naturally occurring, just like all of them, it's naturally kind of taking on different themes for this group of people. So it's really good. So
Hey, before we get into the de-escalation, I'm curious, do you ask, and I know we're going to cover this on a future topic, but do you ask when you're sitting in a room with instructors, how many of them actually train?
every time.
What would you say the percentage is now in 2024 when you ask that question when you're teaching?
Um, in 2024, there are very few departments. We had a level one um, with a certain agency, government entity, a month and a half ago, and
Mhm.
that was the first one in forever that nobody trained,
Oh.
and that's extremely unusual. The norm now is probably in an instructor type class, anywhere from 20% to sometimes sometimes our classes will get up into 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10 that
Mhm.
are training, and they're at least some stripe, white belt, blue belt, purple belt. In today's in the class here in Louisiana, we have a brown belt. We have two or three purple belts, multiple blue belts, and we have just about 20 students. And you have belted jiu-jitsu students who are training gi and no gi. Shoot, we probably have 13 of these people are training.
Okay.
Yeah. And then
So,
at work, this unit is training at work every week.
oh, nice.
Yeah.
And that's something I actually just want to touch on before we get into our topic. There is a shift that has happened, and we all have different terms on like changes here, changes coming, that type of thing. But I'm actually seeing it, you're seeing it when we look at the numbers of people who are training just in a department that's gone up. So I did um, a survey, as you know, for the Invictus recently, and I'd done one in about almost 5 years. And the percentage now of cops that are training in departments has actually gone up. So we are eking our way to the point where we want it. Well, eventually where we want to be, but it is going up. So we're also seeing trainers that are coming to C4C and other type of organized events like this that are training. So it's a good sign, I think.
It's definitely a good sign. I tell guys all the time, oh, no one's training, no one will train. I tell them absolutely that's not true. People are training. We
Mhm.
we have more people training than ever before
Yeah.
in the law enforcement. Now, I also in the next breath will say, hey, we're not there. We're not nearly there. We're but also don't make it worse than it is, you
Right.
know, and don't focus on the guys who don't train. Focus on the guys or gals who are training.
Hmm.
Focus on them. Keep promoting them. Be the example. Encourage people. Don't browbeat them. We will tend to tell the truth. Both Invictus, C4C, other organizations that train cops are going to tell the truth and say, hey, if you're a police officer, you should train. It ought to be mandatory. That is our message. But
Hmm.
we're not going to beat individual people over the head or make fun of them or call them out. We're going to continue to be the example, and we're going to continue to welcome people, attract people to what we're doing.
Yeah.
And I think if you're in this movement and you're just starting or you're relatively new, take a breath, man. Just because you don't have as many people as you think you should have on your agency, we have never had more people training than ever before. Today we always do our lunch rolls, as you know, that's a tradition. We work through lunch at our trainings. We let them have a quick bite. They can graze throughout the class. We encourage them to eat light and then roll. And we did key training. And out of the people in the class, there are a couple people who didn't train at lunch. But like I said, like 13, 14 of them had geese and had a belt. And most of them had a stripe on their belt or more. And that's the majority of the class that's in there. So now they have 900 plus troopers, I guess, on the sworn side. That these people that we're coaching and teaching this week are responsible for training, right? It's like 900 plus troopers for the state. How many of them are training? It's a small percentage, but it's more than we're training 7 years ago, 6 years ago, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
They've got a solid purple belt running their DT program. He's tough. He's very, very talented, very receptive. He's younger, so he's going to bring this forward. It's never going to go away in this agency because this kid's in like his 10th year of law enforcement. They just made him the lead DTI for the agency. He's a solid purple belt.
Yeah.
He's in shape. He's in his late 30s, mid 30s, late 30s. This agency will train jiu-jitsu or police jiu-jitsu based concepts for the next decade or more easily. And then it's just going to get passed to another guy like him. So that's what we're seeing is agencies adopting this kind of training, and then it's not going to go away. So it'll only grow.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so let's talk about how physical intervention is also a strong de-escalation tool and tactic. You and I chatted before we went on air and talked about how the term de-escalation is typically pigeonholed. There's a lot of politics behind it. So, Chad, I want you to just kind of talk about what de-escalation means for actual physical intervention and how it's appropriate.
Yeah, I think. Well, I know. I don't think from being involved in the industry since 1998. Political groups, politicians, sometimes even administrators will look at de-escalation as the process of not using force, of continuing to have these conversations with somebody which I agree with, by the way. If someone is being ornery, they're just argumentative, they're upset, they're emotional. I have no issue at all with de-escalation, primarily being a communication tactic where you use things like active listening or empathy or maintaining calm during communication. You should maintain calm if you can during force application. I agree with that principle 100%. Even while I'm using force, I ought to maintain calm. Addressing underlying causes of why the person might be upset. I agree with all of those things to a point, and that point is when the person's behavior continues to escalate, because de-escalation is a two-way street. This is one of the issues I have with the topic or the word. Oftentimes, if things elevate to a shooting or something like that, there are groups that will just say, oh, the cop's job is to de-escalate. They shouldn't have gotten in that shooting. Well, I can use empathy, active listening, try to get to the root cause of the problem, try to connect with the person up to the point they draw a gun. They start pointing a gun at me. And then that part's over. That has failed because two people play in this de-escalation thing. I do believe calm's important in body language, communication, and even force application, because what I'm seeking is compliance. From the moment I go out on a situation, I would like compliance. If I'm not receiving compliance, I have to begin to realistically and reasonably look for the level of threat and whether I can mitigate that threat through a process other than physical force. And if I can, that's when de-escalation is non-physical force. But what's interesting is I Googled de-escalation. I didn't even look in a police manual. I just Googled it. The very first thing that popped up, de-escalation is and this is from AI, a set of techniques and actions used to reduce the intensity of a conflict or potentially violent situation. The goal is to calm people down and prevent the situation from becoming more harmful or aggressive. De-escalation techniques can be used in many settings, including law enforcement. Mm-hmm. So from Google, it actually talks about actions. Mm-hmm. That's where I think it gets lost in the political spectrum or even the administration spectrum within agencies from time to time, especially if people, depending on their career history, if they haven't been involved in much physical conflict on the job and now they've promoted, or if they're just very political. And, one of the most frustrating things from a law enforcement perspective, I know our brothers, sisters that listen to this podcast are going to be able to relate, is when you have staff who did come from units or were active as patrol officers and they did have uses of force. And you think, okay, well, great. So-and-so finally promoted. They get it. And then as soon as they get a rank on their collar or something, they suddenly think like they're amazed you had to touch people on a call to de-escalate them. And then they're looking to discipline people for not talking more. And it's like, hey, man, I knew you when you were in the street. I used to watch you. And I thought you were going to understand that this is a process. There's more than one person needs to be de-escalated.
One that we're running into a lot is the public's perception of what de-escalation is. And that is a struggle across the board in Canada, United States. And I think that's a commonality that we're seeing. So I agree with you 100% that if you have never been involved in someone shouting at you, having a bad day, all the things that we run into in law enforcement, it's very hard to put yourself in someone else's shoes. So I often get a kick out of those, when the news reporters do the shoot, no shoot,
oh my goodness,
practicing, and they're like, well, I just shoot them in the hands or I don't have to. And then they realize how fast things happen. And then afterwards, the reporter is talking in the camera and going, that was much different in reality than I'm used to. So that's the same kind of thing. De-escalation, when it goes physical, can also be de-escalation happening, but it's used with our hands being calm and things like that. So it happens all the time, Chad. It's a worldwide phenomenon.
What's interesting is even activists who have been put through scenario-based training, reality-based training, whatever you want to call it. We actually did some of it at Vegas Metro with some news groups. We've done it a couple times over the years. Once we even had a reporter enroll and allowed them a spot in an academy class because Vegas Metro has its own academy, and they went through the academy and had to go up and had to be inspected and get yelled at, had to do their homework, had to. The deal was, hey, if you don't treat this like you're going through the academy, we'll just eject you. If we think you're running around with the recorder and just trying to, you're going to go through the academy. And that person, when they got done, was starkly different in how they wrote about the police and what they wrote about use of force events. Even activists, Phoenix PD did, or I think it might have been Maricopa County. It was one of those in the Phoenix area. There was a very known locally activist. I don't know if he was with Black Lives Matter, because it might have been, it was around that time, might have been prior, but he certainly was an activist of law enforcement, unlawfully or incorrectly, unreasonably using force on minority suspects and specifically on Black suspects, and also felt like shootings happen way too quick. The cops are trigger happy, that kind of a thing. They put him through this training, and that guy shot everybody. He shot no shoots. He shot everybody. He had people advancing on him empty hand in the scenarios. He was shooting them. And then they would debrief, because we debrief after those events. He would have excuses on why he fired. And at the end of that, he completely changed his tune and said, hey, I, with all honesty, because part of the deal was they got to video it. They had reporters there and they watched it. And so that's kind of a famous one that's floated around from time to time. But de-escalation, I think people, because they don't have the experience of being called to a situation where it is your job to manage that situation. And when I say manage the situation, it's manage your safety, it's manage the safety of the people involved, and it's manage the safety of the people in the area. You have to manage all of that, right? And so if you have an individual in that scenario who will not calm down, continues to elevate, and then begins to develop or exhibit behavior that you can reasonably articulate is an actual physical threat to the other people in that person's environment, and you can't isolate that person, that's always an option, is, hey, well, let's isolate them. Let's get everybody else out of the area. But that's not always a reasonable thing, and often is not reasonable based on wherever this event is taking place. And, plus the other people in the area have a right to be there as well. There's all kinds of over here. Well, I'm going to make everyone leave so this guy can continue to be a threat to no one but himself. And we're all going to leave, and I'm going to make people leave. Well, there's all kinds of things that become dicey there. Certainly, we would isolate someone prior to hurting them if that were a reasonable option. Because their safety ultimately is very, very important. Everyone ultimately does not want to see an event where lethal force is used. Certainly the officers don't want to use lethal force. When it happens, it's often very hard on them. It often leaves them questioning what occurred and what they could have done differently and those kind of things. But true de-escalation can be, and often is, physical force. That might be what's required. For an active assailant who is actively shooting people at a school and shooting kids at a school, de-escalation is physical force. Now, if you get to them and they actually disarm and they quit, we are bound by law, by integrity, to take them into custody. And so we do. But if we get to them and they are still resistant, including flight and staying armed and continuing to move, they're going to get engaged. Because that is the only reasonable de-escalation in that moment. Now, if that engagement ends that lethal behavior by them, well, then we can switch gears and we can use lower force and we can restrain them. And then you'll often, today in modern policing, I don't see any officer involved shootings where the suspect is no longer a reasonable threat to the officers. They're still a threat because they could be just out of the fight for a minute and come back. But the officers can safely close distance and begin to treat suspects. That happens day after day after day in my nation and in yours, where officers have to engage someone based on their life-threatening behavior. Once that engagement takes place, the suspect's behavior de-escalates to a lower level or goes away, and you will watch those same officers restrain that person to keep them in that lower level of resistance so it doesn't flare up again, and then begin to give them medical care right there in the street. So, Ari,
So,
how do you think de-escalation though relates to not these extreme, not the extreme example
mhm.
of a shooter or an active stabber on the boulevard in Las Vegas where he's just walking up and stabbing people randomly? How do you think de-escalation might apply to a disturbance call or a fight call where a party refuses to slow the momentum and calm down? The police are attempting that, and it's not happening, and that person stays elevated and maybe even begins to show physical propensity of threat to other people in the environment. How does de-escalation play there for you?
You and I have talked about this before, and you had a really good term about when it does go hands-on. The great thing about grappling is you take the fight out of someone. They know that they don't have anywhere else to go. So, in my personal experience, when it's going to go hands-on and de-escalation verbally has failed, and I know it's about to go hands-on, um, what happens to that individual is they keep ramping up and they keep ramping up and it keeps going up. And I'm like, well, people wonder where that ceiling is. And the problem is that ceiling can eventually get to a point where it goes from physicality to I'm going to take this cop's gun and shoot them, you know. So there's a point that we need to intervene before it gets escalated. So I love when you're in a situation with a suspect and you have to go hands on and you take the fight out of them. And then that's why we've talked about that grappling of they have nowhere to go. You're physically, positionally dominating them. And after their gas tank begins to decrease, you can also verbally also de-escalate and talk to them at the same time, which is great. It's very difficult typically to punch someone in the head and tell them to calm down, right? However, being in a side control, knee on belly, mounted position, whatever you're in, I think it's a really good thing. So my experience is when it goes hands on, just that basic jujitsu and wrestling and grappling is a way to really bring someone down. And it doesn't, it's not going to be immediate sometimes. And as long as my back is covered and I'm in a safe position to do it, I have yet to have someone escalate to a point where it's got to me pulling my gun on them in that physical confrontation because I would say if you're training jujitsu, once you get a hold of someone, especially if they're not training, you're going to own them.
It, it's been my experience as well, and the only time I've ever uh, had my firearm as a reasonable force option on an actual event, the other person was armed, and
Yeah,
they were armed. They would not disarm,
totally.
and they began to engage us.
Mhm.
Whether that meant closing the distance with each weapon, or whether that meant, um, you know, firearms and they're shooting at us or pointing the gun at us.
Yeah.
Those have been the only times that I've seen a firearm be the answer to that problem for me, even on calls I've been on.
Yeah.
Outside of that, um, you see some intermediate force application, but out of the people who train on a routine basis, and I define train not, well, both of us. Train does not mean I went to quarterly
Yeah.
training that the department puts on or the annual post training that is mandated. That's not training. Training is people who train are training 2 to 4 or 5 times a week, every week,
Yeah.
set aside times, and they're going and they're competing with other people, uh,
Yeah.
and 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 so we've talked about this before. I don't I don't want to get too into it because we have talked about this somewhat at length. I'm sure we'll circle back to it in different ways. And that training has to have a grappling component, as opposed to just striking guys who just box or they just do Muay Thai. I'm not saying that that cannot be effective for law enforcement self-defense. And I'm not even saying that that can't be a de-escalatory maneuver with a suspect. But right out the gate, it's intermediate force or reportable force.
Yeah.
Canada terms it as, but it's reportable force, and certainly it's a step up from empty hands on control, pretty much universally anywhere you go. So I think de-escalation, I can tell you multiple times I've taken someone down, established top dominant position, established sticky hands with pressure where I'm controlling different aspects, whether it be their head, their wrists, or their hands. And I just have a conversation with them while I dominate them through like a knee on top position, where it slows everything down, it stops their mobility, and I'm able to communicate effectively. And they realize there's an option other than fighting this guy who's in a dominant position.
Right.
And he's actually willing to not fight if I'll begin to obey. And I've had people obey repeatedly over the years.
So that kind of brings up a point for me that I want to ask you about. So I have found that officers who don't train, and we're going to talk about it's this part of de-escalation, but they go hands-on. They have no grappling experience, no jiu-jitsu. They've been cops for 15, 20 years. They strike people, but they also are grappling. And I point this out all the time to cops who don't train. It's like, do you arrest people? And they go, yes. Do you have to put your hands on them to arrest? They go, yes. That is a form of grappling. So when you have a suspect that's fighting you're starting to grapple with them. You're wrestling with them. The point that I try to make to them is, how about you become more efficient in that one little area rather than you just trying to ragdoll? Because do you get tired when you do that? Yes, I do. Your efficiency sucks. That's why. You don't know positional dominance. You don't know any of that. So even if you can give a positional critique of someone who doesn't train and understand that their efficiency goes up, then it's great. All police officers grapple, whether they like it or not. They do, and I find it ridiculous when I hear jiu-jitsu is stupid. I don't want to do it. I'm not going to grapple and go to the ground. That's fine if you're not going to go to the ground. You're still putting hands on someone. That is grappling and that is jiu-jitsu. So there is a disconnect there in what they understand jiu-jitsu is.
Well, and you're not being honest. I mean, I'm telling you right now, what a great thing for you to bring up. Like, all of us are grappling. That is what guys do. And if that guy is resisting on his feet, everyone takes him to the ground, a resistant subject for handcuffing.
Yes.
Everyone, knock it off. I just start teaching people wall tactics, which is basically the wall. The wall is the ground. So we use it the same way. But I didn't teach it to my agency. Guys weren't doing it. Now, in a correctional facility, there may be some differences here. And it might be that individual guys have used this tactic over the years. But LVMPD did not have a wall grappling curriculum.
Yeah.
That taught. And then as a solo and or team tactic, they didn't have it until I brought it to them. So they are grappling guys. They are ending up leaning against walls. They are doing all those things. So to your point, it's really kind of crazy to me. It would be analogous to me to saying, I want to play baseball. I want to be a pro baseball player. I can't stand hitting baseballs. It's a bunch of nonsense.
Yeah.
I definitely don't want to practice hitting baseballs. But, I'm going to be a baseball player. And then what's crazy is they actually let you do it. So then you're just getting up there and hacking, and who knows if you're going to get a hit. And by the way, occasionally you keep swinging, you're going to get a hit. You're going to make contact. Doesn't mean you're good at it. Like it's crazy to me.
Yeah.
I've told this story many, many times. Our guys have heard it out there. If you know me, you've heard this, so I won't belabor it at all. But I literally started training and searching for a training methodology. I didn't know what Jiu Jitsu was. I'd never trained traditional martial arts. I didn't know what MMA was. The UFC was in the early years. This is the late 90s. And I was watching some of those early fights, but I didn't connect that to police work. The early fights were truly style versus style. And some of them were, you had a sumo guy fighting the Dutch kickboxer. He got kicked in the face. His tooth flew out of his mouth. Like, I'm not doing that on calls. So I didn't make that connection until literally I sought out training because I realized it doesn't matter if I like wrestling, which was not a sport I chose growing up. I didn't wrestle, nor did I do jujitsu. What happened was I realized what I have to do at work. And then I went to find that in a venue that I could practice over and over because I knew I have to practice to be good at anything. And I wandered into an MMA gym. I tried a couple other things that were striking based. And it's not that I'm against striking. I think you should be able to strike effectively. You should have a good enough handle on striking that you know how to throw a punch effectively. You know how to throw a kick effectively, a knee, an elbow. You know how to defend those things. On a fundamental level, I should be able to walk into a gym, put big gloves on and spar. I should be able to put little gloves on and mix in wrestling and wall work and everything else and go on the ground with strikes. I should be able to do all of that. But that wasn't starkingly missing when I went into those, because I sought out some striking styles, not knowing what I'm looking for. But they were doing stuff that I'm like, I can't do this on a traffic stop when a civilian doesn't want to give me his license.
Right.
I can't Martin kick him. And this was in 98. And you kind of could, but not 100%. I just knew it wouldn't be as effective. I was looking for an effective way to control and handcuff another human. You can't do that to a resistant person without grappling.
I know.
You know, you can say, oh, I'll tase him. Well, that, depending on your agency, I know for us, I'm in Vegas where the clothing benefits us for the majority of the year in Vegas. And our taser application success rate is not more than 60%. It's less than traditionally. Now we do have a new taser, and I've heard it is being more effective, the newer model. But I don't. First, we don't have enough data. We haven't had it long enough.
Yeah.
But the taser traditionally at our agency has been right around half for effectiveness. There's all kinds of reasons for that. One probe gets a good connection, one doesn't. Mm-hmm. The clothing they're wearing, you missed with both because they're separating as they're moving through the air. They're separating. You hit a piece. You hit their belt buckle with a probe. It was a good deployment. One went in through the shoulder, and one hit him in the belt buckle.
Yeah,
bounced off. That is what it is. You did an appropriate probe deployment. The tool didn't work. So I'm not saying taser's not a good tool, but it works like half the time. And I can use it only on a small percentage of calls. The percentage of calls that I can put my hands on someone. And when we talk about de-escalation and then excessive force or people's interpretation of excessive force, those events are almost always events you could have had grappling as an option. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
When we see the ones that get paraded out and they say, look at this horrible use of force, it's almost always some kind of striking, some kind of throwing someone down, they get up, throw them down again, they get up, try to tase them, punch them. It's almost always that kind of prolonged event where the person hasn't pulled out a gun, and we're not talking about a gunfight that we should have been grappling. That's not what we're advocates of. It's for that other event that you see so much ineffective force. And instead of that, if we had some effective grappling, it truly would have de-escalated the person's behavior.
What are your tells when you look at an officer who isn't calm, is pretending to be, and the reason that they aren't calm is because you know that they don't have tools in their tool belt for hands-on grappling. What are the tells that you see in officers who just don't have it and they're pretending? What's the non-calm tells for you?
Well, one of them is going to be in nature, you see certain animals who bluff their way with predators. And often they'll have these will be animals that are bright, or they have the capacity to flare and to puff. And they suddenly become bigger than they look, and they have some very distinct coloring, those kind of things.
Yeah.
You see some similar traits in folks who are not confident in their ability to put their hands on somebody. They begin to peacock, they begin to bluff up, they begin to try to send very, very dominant. Not when I see de-escalation attempted through bullying gets thrown around a lot. I think it gets misused, but through that kind of bullying behavior, and that's how they're attempting to gain compliance. That generally is not a person who has calm born of struggle. Calm born of struggle. You realize you're undefeated in fights you don't fight. You realize everything's going to end well if we don't fight each other, because I've been in the struggle. I've been in the mix so many times. And some of what the real demonstrative, my tone of voice goes way up. I began to change colors. I'm beginning to spit when I talk. I'm pointing my finger at the person. Now, make no mistake, there are times you're on gun. Profanity. I'm beginning to lose control of just the normal communication that I might use. My communication is becoming single syllables.
Yeah.
Very biting, very halting. I'm repeating things. Those things are all indicators that this person is not calm. They're probably still looking for compliance, but they are having an emotional reaction to the resistance they're getting. And by the way, they may see it building and they may be right. I'm not even saying they're not wrong for having a reaction, but that reaction may not have the effect they hope it has. And they could be beginning to misinterpret what they're seeing because they are getting so elevated. Now, conversely, you take that calm before the storm. That's because I've been in storms. You can't have the calm before the storm if you've been a fair weather guy or gal and fair weather with your training. I'm not going to do hand-to-hand training. Interesting point in this class that I'm currently teaching. I asked everyone to raise their hands if they have a workout regimen. And I already knew the answer because they're fit. These are fit officers. They're in shape. Everyone's hand went up.
Yeah.
And I said, so how many times is it? Raise your hand again if you are doing strength and conditioning 2 to 5 times a week. Raise your hand. Every hand went up again.
Yeah.
And these are some fit cops. And I said, then you have time to train, and you have the funds to train. Now it might take reallocating and stop just going and weightlifting and conditioning 4 times a week, and take 2 of those and make them combative training sessions. And then still do strength and conditioning. That's fine. Modify your strength and conditioning. Cancel your gym membership. Get a fight membership at a gym, a Jiu Jitsu MMA gym. Get a membership there. Make that your go to the gym times, and then acquire some strength and conditioning equipment for your house and have a house gym, and do that a couple times a week. But the calmness I'm looking for during conflict, I won't find in the weight room. I won't find in arts or systems where I yell and scream while I repeatedly hit bags or pads. I won't find the calmness I'm looking for doing that. I'm going to find it during training activities where you're actually encouraged to be calm as you conduct the training. Like, if we are going to de-escalate through communication or an application of force, if we have to have that be a de-escalation. And I believe in de-escalation. I want to make it crystal clear that I think de-escalation is absolutely critical to events, and especially use of force events. But if I can't apply force in a calm, controlled manner,
Right.
then I it's not going to be de-escalatory. It's not going to be effective. An ineffective force. We have this saying at both PJJ and at Invictus: ineffective force has the appearance of excessive force.
Yeah.
And the reason ineffective force has that appearance is that it doesn't de-escalate. It doesn't do. The public thinks I'm going to magically touch him and he's going to, or she is going to be controlled. And why can't that cop control him? And I used to really push back on that. I think in modern policing, I think it's a legitimate question. I think it is an expectation as we get further and further down this road in modern policing that a police officer does have the ability to physically effectively restrain people who are not armed. And I think that's an expectation. And people cannot like it, but if you're in the game, if you're in the business, that's an expectation of you, is that you can physically handle yourself with empty hand techniques.
Yeah.
So,
and I think that this is a message to all chief of police, police boards, political people in cities, mayors, about training for cops. This literally is happening now. We have stats that show police officers who are trained and are doing jiu-jitsu and hands-on training that Chad and I are talking about have less suspect injury, less complaints, less police injury. So those are hard numbers that it appears that people are still ignoring. They think that the training that we are doing and advocating is somehow more dangerous, not less dangerous. And that is my mission, to try to educate administrators and people who just have the wrong idea of what we're trying to do. I want a police officer in a situation which is violent to be able to handle business and no one gets hurt. That is the goal. And cops who don't train have statistically higher amounts of injury and complaints and all that stuff. So I'm not making this up. So
yeah.
it blows my mind that people still think that.
Well, and how does the officer get that? For the people who are listening, they may think in their head, well, Ari and Chad keep saying jujitsu. Well, he could probably get the same thing from Krav or Kung Fu or karate or Tai Chi or weightlifting or this is a big this one they absolutely believe in. They're off base. We're going to send them to a class, and it's going to be PowerPoint, and we're going to be in a classroom, and we're going to talk to them about de-escalation, and that's how they're going to learn to de-escalate.
Yeah,
and that is, you are completely missing the boat. There is nothing wrong with effective communication training. CIT training can be very valuable.
yeah.
Those things are good. I don't have a problem with that.
Mm-hmm.
But if you think that's your de-escalation training, that's a component for sure. But it's only a small component. If you don't have a physical component, physical training where officers are putting their hands on people in a safe manner and moving people from one position to another, escaping bad positions, getting to good positions, controlling the bad guy, working him into handcuffs. If that's not part of your training regimen, then you're wrong. If you make that part of your training regimen and you say, okay, well, we're going to float this out annually, we're going to give our cops training once a year, you're wrong. Part of the issue with de-escalation and successful de-escalation as we move into modern policing is not only what we're training, but how we're training. the
Mm.
methodology behind it,
Yeah.
how often, how much. Um, that is a massive issue. We have we have developed over the years curriculum that we know works anecdotally because it's worked for you and I multiple times. Every one of our partners or squads who have trained with us have had the same results you and I have had. So while it's not a scientific experiment, it is anecdotally true and has been true universally, like not even close to not being true. As I've trained more and more, I have become more effective. Every person who has trained with me and then continued to train has become more effective. Every single one of them. There's not like one of them that I'm like, oh, okay, well, those four guys, they actually got worse as they trained consistently over time.
Right.
That's not, they're all getting better. So not only what are we training, but how are we training? How often? The future of policing, cops should be able to train every single week at work as part of their work duties. They should train 2 to 4 hours a week, every week
Mm-hmm.
during shift at work. That should become the standard for sure. For sure. 2 to 4 hours of your work week. You have a 40-hour work week. You can give up guys from patrol
Yeah.
for an hour to 2 hours a week, and it ought to be required. And everyone ought to be training because in that training, that is where I learn to be calm under pressure. That is where I gain confidence, true confidence of what I can and I can't do. I know what I can do and what I can't do. I'm having an interesting transition. I told my guys the other day, we got done with rolling at lunch. And I said, a frustrating thing for me that's happening currently that I'm battling is my mind will tell my body to do something and I can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
If a purple belt or higher and you have solid fundamentals, I'm getting put in spots that I can escape prior quite easily, quite frankly. But at 56, I'm getting stuck in some spots. Now these guys aren't. I wasn't getting submitted by any students, although if that happens, that happens. I'm not bragging. I'm not going either way with that. I'm just saying it's not like they're running through me, but I cannot do some things. I'm literally saying do this and come up into him, wrestle up, and I physically can't wrestle up on this kid. Because he has some now the white belts in the room, it didn't matter how physically imposing they were. I had no issue with them still.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still sweeping them, I'm still out balancing them, I'm still getting up. They're having no effect on me. Even the younger than me, more athletic, not trained guys are having no effect on this old man. The purple or higher now are beginning to give me real fits. I'm having a hard time, but I'm still calm. I'm still confident, and I still know I'm developing new ways to deal with that problem and get to a spot where I can fight out. The ways I've used traditionally are no longer working. So I don't suddenly feel no confidence. I'm now on a new journey to develop new things.
Yeah.
And I'm used to being uncomfortable under somebody.
Yeah.
Like you can put pressure on me. Henry Akins is different. He puts pressure on me even where I'm at right now, and he just destroys me
Mm-hmm.
with his pressure. And so even where I'm at, there's room for growth. And that's the beauty of doing this kind of training. The officer will never stop progressing if he trains 2 to 4 times a week, or she, in jiu-jitsu, grappling. I include wrestling and jiu-jitsu, and then add in strikes and weapons. And the strikes and weapons can be less frequent than the grappling. And you can create a cop who has the ability to de-escalate without relying on his tool belt
Yeah.
or her.
And I'm finding changes happening too. So I'm 50. And we talked about this last podcast, I think, on the lion share part, but we have to redefine what we consider our wins. So I'm looking at it now where when I was a white belt, my goal was to survive. That was a win for me. As I became a blue and a purple and a brown and a black, and I was in my physical prime, then my wins would be, can I sweep? How many times can I submit? Now, as I'm fighting, that 6'4", 220-pound blue or purple belt that are monsters, that are 28, 30 years old, my wins are, okay, am I surviving? Am I calm? Just like you. And so I just redefine it and I'm okay with that.
Thing to me is even as I'm working through this current challenge, this
Yeah.
current, we get done rolling, and the kid, and I say kid, he's in his 30s. He's in
Yeah.
purple belt, a couple stripes, he's solid. But the
Yeah.
kid says to me, I've never been so frustrated after a roll. I go, what are you talking about? He goes, I can't flatten you out. I can't get anything.
Yeah.
I was totally ineffective. And the whole time I'm trying to do the thing I've been able to do for years that I couldn't do. And this happened to me. This has been happening to me now. This is becoming this current journey and problem I have right now. But he relays to me how effective I felt.
Mhm.
Well, that's even in the midst of not being effective, not doing what I wanted to do, based on the hours that I have and being calm and being relaxed. He thought I was doing what I was doing on purpose. And for me, I'm failing in the middle of that role. I'm not accomplishing what I want to accomplish. And eventually I did work it to a different direction, and I did some different things. The main thing that's changing for me
Mhm.
is when I want to go and my mind tells me to go
Yeah.
and to start to switch spots, I can't go anymore.
Mhm.
I'm trying, but and it's odd. It's a weird thing. And when I get on top now, I'm still smashing these guys who don't have the hours in the background to deal with my pressure and deal with what I'm going to bring once I get on top. So on top, I'm still being pretty effective. The
Mhm.
other part that's starting to change for me is I'm starting to get swept more than I used to. But those are because I train, these are natural things that I can continue to address and still be calm. And I can see some of the challenges I'm having. I'm having to work through it because there's a new challenge, but I'm not lost. I'm not at step zero, because I have this background.
Yeah.
You can make this analogous to an injury in the field. I'm in a fight and I suddenly get injured, and now that doesn't work anymore. Well, I'm not done because I've got such a breadth and stuff to work through, but that'll be a whole nother podcast. So back to de-escalation. But I think that composite is why training, physical, hands-on training leads to true de-escalation, not PowerPoints and not a classroom setting. And
Agreed.
even scenario-based training where we might use what we learned in a classroom setting on communication or something like that. That could be very valuable in a scenario setting where the people were just verbally resistant, but they don't become a threat. Let's see if the officer stays calm and de-escalates.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm cool with that. I'm a fan. That's good. That should be most of your calls. Most of your calls, even with irritated or snipey people or whatever you want to call it, most of those calls should end with you navigating their disagreeing attitude and you working through it and staying calm and handling that just fine.
And statistically, as we know, that 99% of interactions with the police are not physical. And, we're talking about the 1%. And within that 1%, we're still talking about de-escalation, but we're also like verbally, but we're also talking at having that competent grappling skill.
Have you seen students who are withdrawn, who were not confident day to day? Have you seen students through consistent ongoing training just rise to a normal level of confidence, not arrogance, not, I don't want to be around that person, or now they have a false sense.
Yeah.
But if you've seen someone come out of a shell, for
Yes.
lack of a word.
Yeah, I think that's probably the one of the biggest benefits of doing what we do, training in jiu-jitsu. Over the 20 years that I've been coaching, that's my almost my favorite thing to see. So yes.
Yes. My one son who trains consistently, his key to becoming a confident, look people in the eye, get outside his own self. He was the seventh child of 8 children.
Yeah.
He had dominant older siblings. When he first started, if you pushed him, he would just fall over. If you cross faced him, he'd just tap out. If you put any pressure on him, he would just quit.
Yeah.
Myself and other men who I respect and love, who also coached him, and other teammates put him through pressure again and again and again. And we watched him begin to become his own guy and begin to be not the seventh lineman kid to go to this high school, and not in his sibling's shadow, and just be comfortable in himself. He didn't try to overtake his siblings. He didn't try to take their place. He actually became more comfortable being the seventh kid at that high school. And older siblings' accomplishments in dance or drama or athletics, and him being able to find his own role and him becoming his own guy. Grappling was a key component. He went to the same church meetings because we're active in our faith. He went to the same classroom meetings. He didn't begin to change for him till he started grappling consistently. And that's when I saw a change. And that's when I saw him become this confident, just normal kid. It came out. So I just want to point that out. That will happen with officers as well. So now let's move to the lion's share.
The lion's share is actually going to piggyback on what you just said. We had one of the officers send us a question. It says, do you think that fight shaming other officers is an effective way to get your coworkers to train?
How do you define fight shaming? What does that mean?
So I'm assuming what they mean by fight shaming is either they were in an incident where they didn't do very well. They still won and came on top, but it's like, yeah, you got your ass kicked or you sprained your ankle in it. Or coming to the mat room for the first time and being like, hey, you just got dominated by that older white belt and you're a 20-year-old person, so you really should start training. So do you think that that is an effective way? I know what you're going to say, to get coworkers to train.
Yeah, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Fighting for most people. So think of how we recruit in law enforcement. We go and we do backgrounds. We look at criminal history. We do a polygraph. We are trying to find people who aren't getting in fights day to day in their life. There's no real way you could be getting in fights every week and then do fine in the background process as an adult. If that happened in middle school or high school, that's one thing. Yeah. But if you graduated high school, you're 23, and you're getting in a fight at bars every weekend, you're going to get screened out, or you might make it through, but you'll be an anomaly. Most of our recruits, for a civilian, a fight is an emotional response around the emotion of complete fear or terror, or around the emotion of anger or frustration. It's emotions coming out when they fight. When you fight shame, you confirm those emotions. You confirm that physical force is an emotional event, and it's not a tool that is sometimes appropriate, sometimes not appropriate. Sometimes it's appropriate for this level, not this level. You are reaffirming to them that combatives or combative events, and you'll see guys who train do this to other guys sometimes, and it's a mistake, and make fun of them and call them names and tell them they're this or tell them they're that. That is not an effective strategy, this fight shaming. The other way I see this done is in the academy. We're doing step by step. We're not having any live rolls. We're having by the numbers technique. Okay. One recruit, you're the suspect. The other recruit's the officer. Suspect recruit, throw a rounded haymaker like at walking pace, like it's not even real. Officer, do an upward block. Freeze. Now do do these 5 techniques while the other guy stands there. And they go from that to fight for life. And they put headgear on these kids and they put a mouthpiece and they make a circle around them like they're back in school. And what does that bring up? It brings up all these emotions. And then they make them fight each other. Fight for life. You got to fight for a minute. And then if they do poorly, they mock them there. Those are bad, bad, bad training methodologies that will reinforce for the cop fighting's dangerous. I need to go to tools and I need to hurt people that want to try to fight me. That's what that will result in. Or that will result in inaction where an officer will not engage when they should be engaging, and they will allow the person to hurt them or hurt another person because it's, once again, emotional. You have beaten them down with the concept of what's good for them. So I don't feel like it's effective at all. What are your thoughts?
No, I agree. I wouldn't change a thing. I said that. I sent the message back to the officer. Not that they believed in it, but I was like, Chad and I are going to say the same thing here. So I agree with you, Chad.
So to give the positive reinforcement, you can. Today, I told instructors in the room, if you're going to be an instructor, you should train. Mm-hmm. But I didn't point out anyone. I said this is a general thing. The other day we did. Kyle McCutcheon, who you know, gave a chart of what an instructor should be good in logistics. They should be good in teaching methodology. Their skill set should be good. He made a little pie chart or a little graph of things good instructors have, but we didn't shame anybody in the room. And what we say to them is, if you are not currently doing this, no problem. Start today.
Yeah.
It's not too late. Start brand new green. Just start pursuing it and you'll be better than you were today. That's the goal.
Yeah.
So there's no shame in, no one's ever shown me this way, or people have shown it to me and I haven't wanted to do it, or I've made excuses in the past. That's all fine. That's all human. Start today. Do the best you can do today. And then that is far more effective. Building them up through physical training is a more effective methodology than shaming them. Shaming will actually make people not want to do it. There is nothing good that'll come out of shaming people. You're just not going to be a resource for them. I want to be a resource for as many people as will allow me to be a resource. I don't want to close those doors with my behavior.
Yeah.
So despite that, I probably do at times, but I don't do it on purpose.
Yeah. So. Context. Well, yeah. Chad, I really appreciate it. Great discussion. And if you, the listener, have any topics that you want Chad and I to tackle, you can always send us an email at info@nozoolines.com. Visit our website, which is nozoolines.com, where I'm found on Instagram, of course. And we'll look forward to seeing you probably in the new year when we're going to have our next session. So this one's going to come out before Christmas, I think. So we want everyone to have a great holiday season. And remember, don't follow us, lead with us. See ya.